30 p.m. on the date of June 27, 2005. And notably, it is the anniversary of the martyrdom of the prophet Joseph Smith in Carthage, Illinois. In 1844, by the way. But I think we're to a point where I was still in the mode of relating missionary experiences. And there are one or two more that I would like to refer to and talk about. And one has to do with a visit to a very famous gentleman. His name is Lee DeForest. And he was the inventor of the radio tube, which made possible radio sets throughout the world. The only reason we had an occasion to meet him was that we received a call in the mission office from a relative of one of his former co-workers. And this relative wanted to know if we could possibly contact Lee DeForest, who was down on Wilshire Boulevard at the DeForest Laboratories. He was an inventor, and find out from him the whereabouts or get a background of history of the relative. I do not immediately recall the relative's name. It was something like Longhurst. That isn't it, but I'm going to use that name anyway as the reference point. We received permission from our mission president to go there at the request of the Longhurst family to interview Lee DeForest so they could get as much information about Mr. Longhurst as they could. We did not really know and realize whom we were going to visit. We took the trolley out to the DeForest Laboratories in Wilshire Boulevard, and when I say we, Elder Keith Smith and I were assigned to do this. And so we went out there and we were told that we should take our tablets with us. We both were capable of taking shorthand. So both of us took our tablets with us, and we're going to record all that we could in our shorthand notebooks regarding what he could tell us about Mr. Longhurst. When we arrived there, we saw this large building called the DeForest Laboratory, and we were to visit Lee DeForest. We went in there as two young missionaries, two young 20, 21-year-olds, to contact this very famous individual. And he was most kind in getting us through his secretary and into his office so we could talk to him. And I can tell you now that if you looked up in the Americana Encyclopedia or the Britannica Encyclopedia, Lee DeForest is very prominent in there and is identified as the inventor and the originator of the radio. He invented the first radio tube, which made radio possible throughout the world. We didn't know this at the time, but we found it out while we were there, and so we were quite awestruck and taken with our little importance and his big importance. But he was so nice and so accommodating. Pardon me, and just to explain the brilliance of his mind, he started telling about the history of his coworker and him as they worked together 20 years previous. This man had places and dates and times so fixed in his mind and his memory that he could just rattle it off without looking at any notes at all. And Keith and I were just astonished that he could think back 20 years and say the date and time and place of everything that he and Mr. Longhurst did together in their employment and in their work together. Thank you, dear. She just brought me some water, which I think I'll take advantage of. She being Sylvia. Well, I have a transcript of that in my records somewhere in my keepsakes. I don't know where I could put my finger on it now. Keith and I both had copies of this, which when we transcribed it from our notebooks, then we preserved that, and we each had a copy. Marilyn Smith has a copy, now is his widow, and I have a copy, and we have treasured that. So that was rather a highlight, but I wanted to tell you a little bit about our interview with him toward the end. And as a great scientist that he was rather agnostic and almost atheistic, but not quite. But at least he was agnostic and questioned whether or not there was a God and a creator. And in the course of the conversation, because Elder Smith and I, as missionaries, we wanted to do our job too. and get our licks in, as it were. And I remember I finally asked him, I said, Dr. DeForest, do you think it is possible for, oh, by the way, he did concede that there may be some overriding universal power of some kind. He did concede that possibility. And so I said to him in a very pointed way, I said, Dr. DeForest, do you believe it's possible for this kind of overriding intelligence and power in the universe to be without personality, to be without being identified as a God, as an individual? And I remember how he sat up rather startled, and he looked at us and he said, I had never thought of that before. Now, what the result of that ever became in his life, I will never know. But Keith and I,
in the next life you'll know.
Keith and I knew that we got the marbles rolling in his mind anyway, and that he was rather taken aback at that thought and was rather stunned by it, and admitted that he had never really considered that as a possibility. But now he has considered it, and whether anything good came of it, we will never know, except that we are very grateful to him. He was gracious to us, and we went on our way with thanks to him. But as I say, he's written enough in every history book and every encyclopedia as the inventor of the radio tube.
I wonder if someone's done his temple work. You never know. Could be done.
And good question. We wonder now, is there a possibility that his temple work could be done for him?
Sure could be.
Oh, that's one experience. And I apologize for my getting involved emotionally the way I do, but you all know me well enough to know that this is nothing unusual and is a very commonplace. The other experience I would like to relate, if I can do so with proper control, And that is early in my mission when Elder Harless or Elder Hatch from Cusharam, Utah, or Elder Harless, one of the two of them, and I, had been invited down to Torrance, California, which is the neighboring town to Gardena. We always drove down on our bikes. We'd been invited down there for a Sunday dinner from the bishop of the Torrance ward. And so we pedaled down there and had a lovely afternoon and Sabbath. We had been to church in the Gardena chapel and then went down there later to visit them at his invitation to dinner. I felt that I have a very strong testimony of the gospel before I ever came out into the mission field, and I could bear testimony of the truth of the Book of Mormon, of the restoration of the gospel, of the prophet Joseph Smith, and all of the things that we testify to. And I felt that I had a strong testimony, and that it wasn't something I had to wait to my mission field to gain, because I already had it. At the same time, we all know the testimonies build and grow and expand with our experience. But there was one little reservation I had always had in my mind that I could never quite resolve. And maybe some of you have felt the same way or had the same wonderment as I did. But I had always wanted to be absolutely sure that when we talk about being children of God, was it literal? Was I really a child of God? And I'd been contemplating that for some time, because I could see in the premortal existence all of these millions and billions of people, spirits, to come to the earth as mortal beings. And I knew that the doctrine was that we were children of God. But I had this strong appeal in my heart, in my mind, and desire that I could know for sure who I was. I left the confines of the house while dinner was being prepared, by the way, escaping all responsibility there.
Sounds like you're still doing that. Yeah.
I'm good at that.
Very good.
I went out into the backyard and sat on the swing there in the peace and quietude of that beautiful backyard with no one else around, and I devoted myself to prayer and contemplation on that very subject. And during that period of deep contemplation and quietude, there came into my soul and being, came into my perfect understanding, a total confirmation that I am indeed a son of God. And that when we talk about God being, that we are all His spirit children, that God being our Father of our spirits, and that Jesus Christ was His firstborn in the Spirit and the only begotten in the flesh, but all of the rest of us still are begotten sons and daughters unto God in the Spirit. This confirmation and conviction and testimony came to me with absolute assurance. It was though it was just a revelation happening to me personally at the time. That I knew then that I was a begotten spirit child of our Father in heaven. And that's a very sacred experience to me, and I don't know that I've ever even told my dear wife about that before. But I knew then that, and then I realized that if that's true of me, it's true of everyone, of all of us. It's true of everyone who has lived on the earth and who lives on the earth, whoever will live on the earth, that all are begotten sons and daughters unto God in the Spirit. So I just wanted to testify that is a true doctrine, and that when the scriptures say, such as in the Doctrine and Covenants, section 76, that the inhabitants thereof, of all of these worlds without number even, that the inhabitants thereof are begotten sons and daughters unto God. That means what it says. Now those two experiences I've just related kind of wind up what I wanted to talk about my mission. Of course, there are unending stories that people can tell about their mission experiences, but I believe that accomplishes what I wanted to put on this tape. And now Russell or Sylvia.
Talked about Mom Real, Grandma Real.
You know, I did not.
And that's who I relate to your mission. 'Cause
I'll try to refer to that briefly.
okay. Because she always send us books for Christmas.
She did.
You might mention.
My dear daughter Sylvia is asking about a lady whom we referred to as Mom Real. She called herself Mom Real. Sister Real and her husband, we taught as missionaries in Los Angeles. We went through the lesson materials with them and taught them the gospel. This one evening, it happened to be my birthday, August 22nd. And I wanted to go up there to visit the Reals and teach them again. I wanted Elder Don Linford to go up there with me. And they all said, no, it's your birthday. We've all planned to go to a movie tonight.
On your mission?
On my, oh yes, in the mission office there.
Oh.
We all planned that we wanted to go to a mission, on your birthday, we wanted to go out and celebrate by going to a movie. And that was permissible.
They probably weren't R-rated.
No,
They were a
no,
lot cleaner
no,
back, a lot cleaner
no,
back
oh
then.
yes.
Black and white.
And that was not an unusual thing for missionaries to be able to go to a movie in those days. This was 65, 70 years ago, you
It
know.
was clean cut back then.
So, at any rate, I said, I'm sorry, but I need and wish to go. I feel drawn that I need to go up to see the Reals. So I got Elder Linford to go with me and talk the others out of going on this
For you.
little birthday celebration. We got on the bus and trolley and got up there, and we taught them the lesson. And it was that evening that she committed to baptism. However, her husband wasn't ready, and so it was detained and delayed. But nevertheless, we made dear friends with her, so that after my mission, we stayed in contact, and eventually, she actually, at the invitation and the lovely hospitality of Shirley, invited her up to Salt Lake. She stayed with us for some few days in Salt Lake. And there, Shirley has something she can tell about with Mom Real, because she had still not capitulated and not been baptized. But I think this is Shirley's story, and I ought to let her tell it whenever she's on. You want to come and tell her right now?
You can just pass the microphone to her, sure, and
Just for a sec.
You want to come over and sit here just for a minute
Okay.
and tell what happened to Mom Rio when she visited our home and you had this conversation with her. You sit down there.
you
This is
can
on.
just,
You
you
can just
can just hold the microphone or
okay. You can
I
hold
just
it-
hold it.
hold it close.
We enjoyed Mom real very much, and Sylvia was just a little baby. And I remember you used to sit on the couch, about like you are now, and I'd be in the kitchen getting preparation for food, getting it ready, and she'd go. and I would,
She was associated with the veterans.
Yeah, she was. She did an awfully lot of work, hours and hours of work at the, was it Sawtell
Sawtell
Veterans Hospital in San Francisco,
She was a real service
and she had received a number of awards. And I had a chance to talk to her about the church, and oh yes, I believe what you're telling me. And she said, I've gone to other churches. I go to this church that's close to me on the corner, and I go to that church. I says, Maud, that isn't the way you're supposed to go to church. I said, you've got to be baptized in the only true church. And I said, you are a Mormon and don't know it. You might know it, but you're doing nothing about it. And I said, you think a lot about a lot of us. You think a lot about the church. You appreciate the church, but you're doing nothing about it. And I said, you know, that's not getting you anywhere. I said, you've got to make up your mind. I said, we have talked to you. We have sent books to you. Vernie has given you the discussions when he was on his mission. And I said, if that doesn't do it, then you don't have a testimony. And I said, I think we're about through explaining it to you because you know and you have read. So that's it. So in a few days,
Challenge to her, didn't you?
I did. I said, you need now to think about it, ponder it, and you need to go home and to join, and you'll be happier.
Well, she attended the LDS church quite often.
Oh, yeah. Well, she attended the LDS church, but yet she didn't do anything about it. She just went and listened, and oh, yes, I believe, and I like what they said. I enjoyed their sermons. Oh, they're wonderful sermons, but she hadn't done anything about it.
She was an intelligent woman.
And the funny thing about it was, I talked to her about the temple, and I said, you know, you could be sealed to your husband. He had passed away. She said, he didn't treat me very good. I don't know whether I want to be sealed to him or not. And I'll never forget that. I don't think she was. I don't know. But anyway, a few months went by, and then we heard from her, and she says, I'm going to be baptized. And we were so excited, but we didn't have the money at the time.
She wanted me to come down and baptize.
Yes, she did, but we couldn't.
Yeah, go ahead and
We
tell her.
didn't. She wanted Vernie to come down and baptize her. But for some reason or other, maybe it was at the time that Vernie was having some health problems, we didn't go down. And but she was baptized, and then the next thing we heard within about a year later, she went through the temple, and then she became a temple worker.
Oh, that's wonderful.
So we were really thrilled to hear that she had completed her work. And sometimes I think you have to, what would you call it?
Draw a line in the sand, huh?
Yes, draw a line in the sand and really make it known to her instead of, well, okay, do what you want to do. I just sort of got a little mad at her. I remember I was mopping the kitchen floor, and I was a pushing that old mop, and I said, you're a Mormon and you don't know it. Now you got to do something about it. Okay, but she's a great lady.
Before you pass the microphone back, tell us about the your engagement that you were saying before, that you were engaged.
Well, Russell wanted me to tell him or tell you about my engagement to this young man. I had met him through a mutual friend, Yvonne Welling. Her married name was Cassidy. She lived here in the city, and she we belonged to a sort of a little group of sewing, sort of a sewing bee, and that was later turned in after the war, World War II, to our dinner club. Because when we got married, then we started a dinner group, and we called ourselves the Terrible 22, 22 of us. And they were a group of wonderful, wonderful people. And she introduced me to Blaine, and I met him.
Is this here in Salt Lake?
Yes, and I met him, and he was home on leave from South Carolina, where his Navy, his ship was stationed. He was on a destroyer escort. He was a yeoman, third class, did stenographic work. And I met him, and then I wrote to him when he went back, and then he came back on another leave and took me to meet his parents, and then he gave me a diamond. Then he went back out, he went back to South Carolina.
Grandma? What year was this?
This was in 1945, I guess, 1945. Well, I had been engaged to him for 18 months, but he first gave me the diamond ring, then he went back to South Carolina, then he called me and asked me if I'd come back to South Carolina and marry him. And I told him that I had always wanted to be married in the temple and not just a civil marriage, and to let me think about it. And the more I prayed about it, and the more I thought about it, I was just in a fog, just a dense, depressive fog. So this one Sunday, I came home from church, and I said to Mom, I'm going to call Blaine and tell him to wait until after the war. I just did not, it was just dragging me down. And he agreed. And then later on, things turned out that we separated. We didn't get married because he had changed a great deal, and he was mixed up like so many soldiers, I'm sure, during the war. He was a beautiful letter writer. He could have been a journalist, the way he wrote and explained things, and his letters were, I could let Mother and Father read them, and they were just explaining about the war and everything, and the beauties of the ocean and all. But he, all of a sudden, I received a letter from him, and he said, we had talked about a temple marriage, and he said, I've gotten so I don't even believe in life after death. He had just made a complete turnaround. And he said, and I've done some things in my life that I'm ashamed of. And he had taken up smoking and probably drinking. So I just broke it off. I broke the engagement off at that time because he seemed to want to do that. And then he came home on a leave, and when I saw him, he was just a changed person. But I was telling Russell tonight that I hadn't seen him since then, but he lived in West Valley, and he died about a year ago, and in his obituary he had been married in the temple, had 4 children, and he was a temple worker. So he completely changed his life back to where he wanted. And I'm sure because of the war and the hell that the war is, that he was just mixed up.
Yeah.
That's too bad. Anyway, no.
Okay, well, let's,
All right, Russell has asked that we continue our story relating my service experience, how that we picked up our crews of gunner, bombardier, navigator, pilot, and all the gunners, the radio operator, I said his name was he's the mechanic on board, flight engineer. There we go. So we had 11 of our crew, and we then got our orders to report to General Chenault of the 14th Air Force, which is known as the Flying Tigers, over in Tezpur, India. We had no idea where that was, Tezpur, India, except that we knew that once we got our orders, that then we would be flown to wherever we were going to go. We didn't have to worry about where we're going because our plans were already taken care of and the orders were there. It turns out that we flew on commercial flight back to New York, from New York to Newfoundland, from Newfoundland to the Azores, the island of the Azores, then over to Casablanca, and then into we head hopping, Tripoli and so on. We finally wound up in Casablanca, Morocco. And from Casablanca, we then went over to Karachi, India. And we were kind of held in Karachi, India for about 2 weeks. And there, my other friends eventually came, caught up, and that I'm talking about Dick North, and Frank Knowlton. So the 3 of us are now back together again in Karachi, India,
that's amazing.
each with our individual crews. So we weren't staying together because we had to stay with our own crews. But eventually, we were flown to our destination. Well, first we were flown to Calcutta, India. And then on the way to Calcutta, we landed in, and I can't think of the name of the city, but probably you all do, where that famous temple in India is, the what? The
Taj Mahal.
Taj Mahal, yes, where the Taj Mahal is. We were flown there, stayed overnight a couple of nights there, and had a chance to visit the Taj Mahal. And I can't think of the name of the town that is. Then down to Calcutta, And from Calcutta, then we were dispersed to this place called Tezpur, Tezpur, India. This was on the banks of the Brahmaputra River.
What was your first impression of India when you?
India was dirty. The people were unkempt. The streets were dirty. Everything about the place was a real contrast to what we had in the United States. There seemed to be no facilities for cleanliness or for upkeep. And the people on the streets, so many people we would see just sleeping on the streets, sleeping in doorways and sleeping in the gutter, and it was an appalling situation. I mean, it was a shock to our systems because we weren't accustomed to that, and yet to them, it didn't seem to be any big deal. Their way of life. I remember reading one time where there was such an overpopulation of India that they counted on the famine every year to kill about 6 million people in order to keep a balance in the population. Well, this one year, the famine only killed about 3.5 million, and so it was deemed to be a failure. So those are the conditions that we were confronted with. Those were in the big cities. Now, Tezpur was a little bit different. It was a country village. The people there actually had some scruples and some higher standards of living and of upkeep and keeping their places. It turned out that Tezpur, India was a British base. It was a British airfield. All it was really was an airstrip with a bunch of, we called them bashas, which are little huts, and they were quite cute little huts with grass tops on them, grass roofs. And we all stayed in these little bashas. And maybe 6 or 8 men in a basha, and there were many of them around, so that they accommodated several squadrons of our aircraft people, of all of the personnel.
Ernie,
Yes.
I know they can't hear this, but when you were there, did you see many of them wearing nets over the mouth?
Yes. The question is, were the ladies particularly, they had veils most of the time, veils over their faces. But India also had the custom of marking up colored markings on their faces. And it denoted certain things such as your status, your financial status, your social status, and you had these marks on you to declare what caste you belong to in the social realm, in the social pecking order, as it were.
Yes, but tell them why they would wear these. They didn't want to.
I'm not sure.
They didn't.
What do you mean?
I gave a lesson in Relief Society about India one time. They believed in reincarnation, and if they didn't want any mosquitoes or flies to go into their mouth, because maybe people were reincarnated who were good people. Maybe reincarnated as flies and mosquitoes, and maybe they were their cousins, and they didn't want them to fly into their mouths.
Do you think
And
that
that
was
was
safe? Do you think that took?
That was that's true. And they still
that's-
believe
Well,
that.
I know, but you weren't on a mic, and I wondered if.
Well, I unplugged it so that we could hear.
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah.
But
So
isn't that interesting? And that's how they still believe.
Well, yes, the
So they didn't want to eat their cousins.
area was just full of animals, and these animals could. Are you? Am I to talk?
yep, you're back.
And tell them about the urine of
The-
the holy cows.
Oh, dear, that's
The holy.
interesting.
You know more about it than I do,
Well,
dear.
they drank that.
I know. I'm not aware of that.
Oh,
This is something I don't
We'll
know.
have to pass
But
it
let me
to
tell you
too.
what I'll
as
tell.
long as you're in India.
Yeah, hold on. We'll have to put a mic on her.
Yeah. We'll,
Yes.
Let's hear Grandpa.
Yeah.
Right now, I'm just saying that there are animals everywhere: goats, water buffalo,
They wouldn't-
cows, cattle of all kinds. The water buffalo was their sacred animal over there. And it would wallow in these big marshes and ponds, and
they wouldn't eat 'em.
it could go any place. I mean, if it wanted to go in your house, it was permitted to so do because it was a sacred animal, the water buffalo.
Yeah.
And I had some. I came home very proudly with some shoes made from water buffalo hide, and they were beautiful shoes, kind of an orange tan color, and they squeaked like crazy when you walked. And mother.
When I did the peanut butter thing.
Anyway, those are my keepsakes. But water buffalo everywhere and in the streets, and I mean, you could find them in a house, in a store, any place. And
Dirty.
Funny tradition.
yes. Now, I wanted to talk about this Tezpur being a British base. So the British allowed us to come in there and occupy that base for the purpose of flying over the Himalayas from India over Burma into China. And we went over there as a tactical unit, as B-24 four-engine bomber squadrons. By the time we got there, General Chennault had determined that no longer did he need the heavy four-engine bombers anymore, but he needed more of the fighters and the strafers and the two-engine bombers that were located now in China and Burma themselves. But what he did need very much our help on was to fly supplies and gasoline over from Tezpur over into China. So while we made our first couple of flights and missions with all of our crew members, with the gunners and the bombardier and everyone aboard, the first few flights were with the entire personnel. But we soon realized and it was determined that the enemy, the Japanese, have been pushed back far enough back into China again, back toward the east coast, that they were no longer a threat to us flying over the hump, and we were no longer in contact with enemy fighters or bombers themselves. It used to be that the Japanese were able to come in and attack our planes flying over the hump. But by the time we got there, it had now improved, the condition had improved so much that we never did meet the enemy. We never did see a fighter plane coming after us, or meet any flak, or meet any kind of resistance, military-wise. The resistance we had was weather. The weather was our enemy. But what I need to explain is, so those conditions being that way, the Air Corps ordered that all of these B-24 bombers that we were all over there in great numbers of, that the bomb racks would be removed from the bomb bays. And in place of the bomb racks and the bomb bays, huge gasoline tanks were put in. And so they filled all these gasoline tanks with gasoline, of course, with the aircraft fuel is what it was. And we each bomber carried 3,000 gallons of gasoline. And we would take off from Tezpur, India, fly up over the Himalayas and over Burma, and then into China, and deposit our gasoline supplies over into various bases in China where they were needed. Now, flying over the hump, we had 3 routes. We had the northern route, the central route, and the southern route. The southern route was the lowest in terrain, and that was the safest route to fly. The middle route was in between, and the northern route, which we flew a great deal of, was the highest mountain terrain that we flew. And it was on that northern route where we got these marvelous glimpses of K2, which is the highest peak, second to Mount Everest. Mount Everest is a little over 29,000 feet, and K2 is about 28,500 or 28,800 feet. But it was close to the height of Mount Everest, but not quite. So it wasn't quite as famous, but it was the name of it was K2, K-2. And we flew by that quite regularly, sometimes in the soup in the weather, and occasionally the weather would be clear enough that we could fly by sight. And that was truly a marvelous sight to see K2, and I have pictures of that mountain hanging on my, what I call my war wall in the other room. And we would fly at the highest at 20,000 feet. And at 20,000 feet, we could look up another 8,000 feet and see the top of K2. Almost always was snow, of course, and then the rest of the terrain was very mountainous and very beautiful when it was clear weather to fly in. But our problem was that we had most of our flying was in the monsoon season, where we had the weather as our combat enemy, literally. Yes, sir.
Your cabin wasn't.
No, we didn't have pressurized cabins in our planes. Everything was by oxygen mask and earphones and microphones communication. It was extremely cold. It would get 50, 60 degrees below zero.
Up in here.
But we were well clothed, well padded. We had lots of flight jacket and flight suits on to keep us warm. But it was, and heavy gloves, of course.
Dad, can I ask you a question?
Yes.
Was it more frightening for you to carry all that gasoline than it was to carry the bombs? For the landing and, I mean, just the chances you're taking with
It turns out that
Repeat the question really quick.
the question is, was it more frightening to carry the cargo of gasoline or the bombs? And since we never carried the bombs, I don't have a direct feel for that, except that we had so much storm and lightning around us that we were always frightened of being hit by lightning with all that gasoline. And it turns out that history has proven and has recorded that over 500 aircraft are lying at the strewn along the Himalayas underground, under where we flew over all the time, that had either been grounded by weather or had been shot down formerly before we ever got there. So there are about over 500 bombers and cargo planes that were simply destroyed and lost over the hump over that period. Now, it took 5 hours for us to make the trip from Tezpur over to Chikiang or Kunming, wherever our targets, wherever our destinations were in China. 5 hours over and then 5 hours back again. So it was a 10-hour round trip with a stop over there in order to eat lunch and recuperate and then fly back again. So it made for a very long flight
And
each
how
time.
often were these flights happening?
We usually flew one day and then had a day off, then flew another day, sometimes 2 days off, then fly again. It was 1 or 2 days rest in between.
Didn't I understand that there was headhunter territory below you too? So that was always a factor.
Yes,
Fear that if you crashed.
The question is, what was down below us? And there were the Burmese in the wilds of Burma, in the mountains and wilds of Burma, was infested with headhunter tribes. And on our flight jackets, right inside our flight jacket, and I have it hanging on my wall, it's written in Chinese. It says, this is what we're told it says, because I can't read Chinese, but it's written all in that Chinese. It says, if you find me, I am an American airman, return me to the nearest American post or American outpost or whatever. And that was if we were. I don't know of anybody who has ever returned. I honestly don't. I'm not aware of anyone who has ever returned, because those were cutthroat natives, and if you were found, I don't think you ever would come out alive. Now, I have recorded in writing 2 very special experiences that I had flying by K2 and nearly plowing into K2 because the compass that I was using, my gyro compass, was faulty to an 11-degree error reading. And then another occasion where we flew into a thunderhead and were tossed about like toothpicks in our bomber and should have been destroyed, but somehow we got through it. Now I've recorded those without having to repeat them here, I believe, and I've recorded them in writing, so that in detail, so that I don't believe it's necessary to repeat them here.
Maybe we do.
You know, I don't mind. I would love to hear
I think
as told by
maybe
you.
it's too late for you to repeat it tonight, but I think it's important to have it on this.
Well, if it is judged important to have it on this tape, them.
But maybe
They're very clear in my mind. I don't think I'll ever forget any detail of those 2 experiences. But I would like, I believe, to reserve it for the next experience, for my next turn at the chair here and at the tape.
Well, could you tell us before, who were the members of your crew that you did your flights with? What were their names? Do you remember the names, or did they have nicknames?
I can't remember all of their names. Truly, I can't.
and you explained that you were the only member of the church and what they
That's
called
correct. The question is, what are the names of all my crew members? Well, as I explained earlier, I think maybe I didn't make the point clear, but after the first few flights, we no longer needed the gunners.
Right.
And so we retained the pilot, co-pilot, and navigator, We didn't need the bombardier or the gunners.
Did you have a engineer?
And we had a flight engineer and a radio operator on hand.
Was that 5 of you?
So there were 5 of us. And Leonard Kinzel was the pilot, Eugene Fish the co-pilot, Vernie Swenson the navigator. We were the officers on board. The others were enlisted men. And I wish I could remember all their names, if I cannot. I probably had them recorded someplace. But they were scattered from around the country. One was from Illinois, if I recall. Leonard Kinzel was from Oregon. My co-pilot was from Ogden. He was a Catholic. And I from Salt Lake City, and someone else was from Texas. One of the either the flight engineer or the radio operator was from Texas. So we did have a good admixture of wonderful guys, really wonderful people.
Tell the story about when you met with the Franklin and what's his name, and you tried to find a place.
We will have to reserve that for another night. It's now 9:30. Our time and tape have expired.
Do you know what would be fun to catch though with this camera?
Ooh.
Yeah.
And it towers up way up above the vision there, but this is the terrain over which we flew. This is K2 also, where we would fly by.
Is that a shot? One of your shots?
No, it is not. These are both commercial photographs
Ah, okay.
that I have since come across that I treasure because I thought I would never be able to find pictures of K2. We weren't allowed to take pictures while we were flying.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And this was a companion bomber that I took out my side window.
Oh, that's nice.
This is
Even though you weren't supposed to be taking pictures
even
while
though
you
I
were
wasn't supposed to.
Good, I'm glad you did it.
And this is my window.
Heading
Heading
Hunter's
Hunter's
Swenson.
Now these camels represent the number of missions flight over the hump.
over the hump, the camel's hump.
But yeah, that's cool.
Instead of bombs, we
That's,
put camels.
that's good. That's
And we had 44 of those camels.
it's friendlier than the bombs.
Yes, friendlier than the bombs.
44.
44
Wow.
of those.
Ooh, that's a lot.
That probably helped.
I don't know, maybe.
This being a picture of our B-24, and this is a B-17.
Hold
This is
on.
our B-24.
Show where
But
your
they
We're
were-
getting a reflection. pretty
Grandpa,
good.
where would your window be?
My window was right there.
Yeah.
Oh, that little one right
and
there.
that's the celestial navigation bubble right above me.
Hmm.
But I had this wonderful view out the nose, which was plexiglass nose, and I could
Wow.
see
So
very well.
that's what your bomber looked like.
Yes, that was our B-24. That's the same plane
Gotcha.
from the side.
Neat.
Is this your one, or is that a? Did
No.
you explain that's a different picture?
That's just a commercial picture
Okay.
of those planes.
Tell him they were called the Flying Tiger. He did. He put it on
The
his
Flying
stick.
Tiger insignia was evident with these other nose
Yeah, you can
paintings.
see the mouth and
And
teeth.
and here, these are my friends, Frank Knowlton and Dick North. This is I.
And that's Dick North over here too.
Yes, it is.
And
Are we getting enough light here?
We are. I'm just trying to keep away the.
Oh,
reflection.
and this is Dick North and I. And up here on top, you can see my great physique.
Yeah, we gotta make sure we get that big strong body. It looks like my kids.
And then over here, I was home on leave before I went overseas. And that's where
Where
I
was that home, Dad?
on 553 South, 5th East.
Is it still there?
Yes.
I've never known that.
No.
You go past.
553
South, 5th East.
5th East. I've got to go see that.
And when did your family move there?
Well, it was
Uh, they moved there
it was an
after I came home from my mission. They moved there before I returned from my mission, so they were already there. And these are all the
That's ex-
insignias, and this is that thing inside my flight jacket in Chinese.
Oh, is that what
And my
said?
medals.
Is that what said to return you to the local?
Yes, the whole thing is not there. It was bigger than that, but you can see it's all in Chinese. I am American Airman. Return me to the nearest
As your
American
flying
base.
flying tiger.
Yes, and the Flying
Patches
Tiger
and-
insignias and the CBI insignia up in the upper right-hand corner.
What does CBI stand for?
China, Burma, India, theater of war,
Hmm.
theater of operation. Some air medals and
See, I can.
Flying Tiger insignia.
The one that you're wearing on your right pocket up there, is it on here? I can't.
Yes, it should be. I'm trying to see which one it is.
Because it's